And then we came to the crisis of past 2 months between Greece and Turkey. Of course, this was kind of expectable in the end. Mm-hmm. The Turkish government, any kind of comment put aside, but there was a solid, thorough argument. In Turkey, we have 4 million refugees, and we received some money from EU. Now it's time to send to you some of them. And solidarity among the EU, then we have to check, to see, do we have any solidarity? Because solidarity is not just an ethical or principle, it's a legal principle written in the EU treaty. And the relocation scheme was a small piece of solidarity, but this is expired. So only 50,000 or so people who were in Greece and in Italy were transferred to other countries, and this was the solidarity, exhausted by European Union. So the what we call urbanization of the European Union policies were spread and became normality. This is a big issue here, that anti-refugee feelings became politics and became also law, breaking EU law. And this is our problem. It's not the problem with the refugees or others, because our rule of law is now falling apart. This is the main issue according to this. If you take the humanitarian crisis, it's a huge humanitarian crisis, because slowly, we don't keep even the pretext of it. So we don't save lives. We say security above all. Step by step, we destroy the whole construct of a solid part of international law that was the refugee law since the 50s. So this is a very fragile new system we are establishing, feeding extreme right feelings and political parties. And if you put it to this fragile bilateral issue between Greece and Turkey, and this is a kind of, let's say, bomb between us that we don't want. And this is the paradox that COVID-19 came to save us somehow. I mean, somehow. I'm talking about the crisis of the past 2 months, when there were, I don't know how many thousand people trying to cross the border of Meric-Evros River. So because of COVID, both countries stepped back to deal with the COVID issue now. But we need to have policies and law to establish a new scheme. And from no party, there's no any sign in such a direction. And unfortunately, EU is collapsing from inside. This is another paradox. No one is pushing from outside. And this is very, very complicated to deal with, I think.
I am speechless.
If you want to discuss it, we have to take one chapter by one to discuss the details, the causes and the results. And I think it's a big discussion. So let me stop here.
Okay, I'm speechless. So let's move to Lülüfer. Lülüfer, from your side, because Greece and Turkey are neighbors. The two countries share a common sea, which happens to be a problematic sea since ever. We know the disputes about the borders, about whatever. And now we have the situation where there's a shift in Turkey of the sentiments, both at the people's level and political level. We have seen in your report there is a surge of hate speech from the basics of the society, and also there is some also political discourse for hate speech and anti-migrant speech, where it is something unprecedented that happened in Turkey before, right? What's the situation? Can you please give us from your perspective, please?
Actually, the arrival of the Syrians to Turkey has been controversial in Turkey all the time at the people level. but the policy was mostly focused on the supporting Syrians, and it was, in a way, appreciated policy, although were not granted, hasn't granted any legal status to refugees. But also, on the other hand, they were the state was supporting and granting some rights like the healthcare service, education, etc. But since 2016 and also Turkey, at the policy level, has started to change its policy, and because of in my view, because of the domestic challenges that AKP government, the government having issues to secure its power in Turkey. That's why it also has changed its rhetoric and also their policy. I mean, how? It's on the one hand, they suspended that morally superior rhetoric over Europe, and highlighting that Turkish government is supporting the refugees, but European Union and the European countries are abandoned the refugees to their own fates. But on the other hand, the government has started to threaten the refugees to send back to their countries. And on the other hand, last year, I mean, a few months back in December 2019, a new law came in force, and those rights used to be entitled to Syrians especially are restricted. And this is only the side of Syrians actually, but the non-Syrians refugees like Afghans, Iraqis, Turkmens, etc., people from Turkmenistan, etc., they did not entitle those rights, and this is that duality among the refugees in Turkey. And on the other hand, Turkey, although that Turkey, suspended that its morally superior position and threatened the European countries to open the borders, etc. After that, the events, took place between March and April, which is, kind of paused because of the coronaviruses. Really undermined the AKP's policy and its rhetoric as well, because people just let go to and wait on the border space, on the border, and spend a month in cold and in Hungary, etc. It's a big time humanitarian crisis, I think. And this is also another example that AKP is kind of, stuck between the domestic and international politics, and it already lost its bargaining chip that with against the European Union, because that threat has been repeated by the top governmental, politics. Again and again, that I can open the door and let the migrants, refugees go to Europe, and actually they did, and it did not work. Okay, that's right, that both Turkey and Greece really caused big humanitarian, crisis, and they overlooked all the humanitarian law, international law, etc. But at the policy level, Turkey just failed and lost its morally superior rhetoric position, and also its chip, bargaining chip, actually. And also we see that the increasing anti-Syrian sentiments and xenophobic speeches and acts. Actually, just last month, 2 refugees shot dead. One is murdered by the police, and the other is just found in the garbage, stacked by whom we don't know. And it's a big problem, really, that racist rhetoric and the practices. And this is because I think controversial and challenging rhetorics and politics in Turkey. On the one hand, AKP is offering citizenship, although it's not clear that how they can achieve that citizenship status. What is the procedure? It's not transparent. We don't know the exact numbers. If a politician comes front and expresses a number, then we know, and otherwise we don't know. And on the other hand, again, the government officials says that we can send back the refugees to their countries. So this causes a big crisis, really, and causes to increase in hate speech and the acts.
Okay, one question. You have said a lot, but in a nutshell, we're wondering how specifically the internal political powers within Greece and within Turkey, the question is how they're using this, excuse me for my words, this issue as a chip for their discourses, because both countries have parliamentary democracies, and always politicians think of how popular they are because they always think for the next elections, either being local elections or national elections. So how are they using the issue of the refugees and the crisis for their own political gain in order to attract support from their various support bases within the populations? How are they using this issue? Konstantina, you may start.
Yeah. Okay. Look, here we have in Greece, as you know, we have now a right-wing government in the past for the past year, and before that we had almost 5 years of let's say left-wing government, but in coalition with a very populist right wing, which is a paradox. But this was the issue of the result of the crisis. And then during the, let's say, the left period of governorship, the refugee issue was, the government was trying not to stress the different topics that were stressed and were highly in the agenda of the previous government. So again, the right wing. So we have a change from the long right-wing governments, quite xenophobic, to the left, and then come back again to the right. So the refugee, xenophobic or security-based discourse was always played by the right-wing governments as a program.
Uh-huh.
So what happened in fact, and now this is interesting to see, that now nowadays the government has to, of course, to manage the whole issue and the problems, is that they have, and they were trapped because now, although they have raised, let's say, the municipalities and the people in a xenophobic discourse, and now they have to put them in coordination under the government, to receive refugees in their villages, in their small cities, blah, blah. So, and now the government experiences a strong resistance, let's say, from the local population, because they were fed and fostered with the xenophobic discourse that they produced in the past year. And they won the elections, partly also for that. So now, but they have to manage the whole issue, you see. So this is a game, and sometimes I'm pretty sure that they were overdoing in their discourses, and now they have to do something, and it's very difficult for them to do. And this is a European pattern, I'm afraid. I mean, what was happening in the whole Europe happened in Greece too.
So there is
this how I can explain, just to give you an example.
I see. So there is this double speak cacophony, this dissonance. So on a local level, we see that they may say one thing about the rule of law, then to the local constituencies where they want to get votes, they use other sort of rhetorics. We see that this cacophony that's going on. I wonder what is the situation in Turkey, Lülüfer? How is there some similar patterns of dissonance? On the one hand, you hear politicians saying about rule of law and human rights and look how great we are. But on the other hand, they say, yes, it's a problem. Those people are a problem and they are, I don't know, criminals. They steal our jobs or they bring COVID. What's the discourse in Turkey, please, Lülüfer?
The situation is that actually it's kind of half and half of the population, as it is in the politics. Half is the government supporters, and half is the kind of, let's say, the half and half is broadly for sure. Is the opposition parties and their supporters, let's say. But actually, in a few years, since 2 years, also the picture has been changing. That as the Turkey is facing economic problems, and people are having problems to earn their livelihoods and secure their futures, etc. The refugees also has been the target and has been the people to blame to lose their jobs and that the problems. And also actually the major economic opposition party, the Republican Party, has always been critical about the refugees and government's refugee policy. And as I remember, the last 5-6 years, since last 5 years, let's say, they've been also saying that if they come to the power, they will, send back the refugees to their home. So now also AKP voters and let's say the people who used to be supporting the AKP's the government party's policies also started to criticize it as Turkey is having economic problems. And on the other hand, it's also has been an issue in Turkey that the suspect of mostly the secularist people, but also Alevis, Kurds, etc. If the government is instrumentalizing the Syrian refugees, especially to instrumentalize them to Islamize the population, kind of demographic engineering, if the AKP is conducting, this was another problem, and this become real critic and a big discussion during the elections, both the local and the general elections, and especially the latest elections was the local election, and during this time also people, the anti-Syrian and anti-refugee sentiments increased because people believed that AKP will provide citizenship to refugees to gain more votes, to gain the power again. These are the top, controversial, challenging points in Turkey, and also people usually associate refugees, especially the Syrians, because their number is far higher than the other groups. They link them to kind of criminal acts, and also it's a bit interesting, but also think that they are culturally not fitting in Turkish culture actually. And accusing again, blaming of involving in criminal acts as well.
Right, George. I see we have a question from. We have question. What is it, George?
Someone taken the issue of EU breaking its own laws into the European Court.
Yeah, I suppose this will go to Konstantinos. Has anyone taken any action to challenge in court about because there's obviously, as you said, Constantine, the acquis is being broken, the laws are being broken. Has anyone taken any action against that? We cannot hear you. We cannot hear you. Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. We cannot hear for some reason.
My fault.
Okay. Now we can hear you. Yes, go on, please. Yeah.
So, as you know, we have, let's say, one EU legal order with the Court of Luxembourg dealing with the EU law. And then we have a broader Europe of 47 member states of the Council of Europe and the Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg. So Greece belongs to both, but it's very difficult to find cases dealing with human rights challenging the EU law. That happens, as far as I know, just once from an Afghani refugee, 2 Afghani refugees from Chios, that they were challenging the EU-Turkey statement or declaration. And then this is very interesting, the Court of Luxembourg denied to take the case because it says, sorry, this is not an EU-Turkey bilateral agreement, but it's a bilateral agreement between all member states of EU with Turkey. So this is not EU law. And this reveals the hypocrisy of EU, how they showed people that this is a EU policy, but of course they knew that this was breaking the EU law and the rule of law of European Union. And this is very revealing, I think. But however, we have a lot of cases since the 2000s versus Greece, dealing with the status or the position or the conditions of deprivation of freedom for many different cases. But one I think is the most important, and we are waiting for we're expecting the judgment in the next 3-4 months, dealing with a pushback by the Greek Coast Guard to, if you remember, the Pharmakonisi case. So the small boat coming from Turkey sank, and this was due to maneuvers conducted by the Greek Coast Guard. And then 12 people died. So we took, I'm saying we took because I was the president of the Greek League of Human Rights at that time. So we took the case to the Court of Strasbourg, and we're expecting to be in favor of the victims. So this will show the limits of the powers of the state to do pushbacks. That will be very important for it, I think. And will reveal again this issue, because pushbacks we have a lot in the past year, up to date. I mean, we have hundreds of people that are pushed back to Turkey illegally by both the Greek army and police and Frontex. And I think this is a scandal for European Union to tolerate pushbacks or to supervise pushbacks. Depends how you put the stress in this discussion.
Let me ask something just to clarify. That infamous or famous agreement that was enacted in 2016 between EU and Turkey, do you, both of you, it's a question for both of you, do you say that it actually violated national laws and also EU laws by themselves? I'm talking about the agreement that was 4 years ago. Did it actually violate laws? Can't hear you, sir.
Look, there's a, I would say, if we don't go straight to violation, because you have to take, there are 4 or 5 different things to deal with. The problem is that the refugee law is based on the Convention of Geneva 51, is not in accordance with this agreement or bilateral treaty between Greece and Turkey now. So to return, I will give you an example. To receive people who claim their asylum status, and to say, no, sorry, I have to return you back to Turkey, whereas Turkey is not a country that is bound by the Treaty of Geneva for them. And then we have to treat them to say if Turkey is a safe country for them, second question mark. And then even more complicated to send back one Syrian, and then Turkey has promised to send another Syrian to EU through resettlement. I can see that this fits very difficult to the whole scheme of human rights and the rule of law. And then if you take the Greek law, because this was the question, the national Greek law, of course there are problems, and that's why 95% of the cases were blocked by the Greek courts, saying that we cannot implement this agreement, that were transformed into the Greek law as a Greek law. So for a series of problems. That's why this was absolutely political, the whole thing. And having this distancing politics from law creates another big issue for us all in Greece, Turkey, and the EU.
Okay, the next question is for Lülüfer. So the question is, hang on, what is George?
I thought you asked them both, so I think you should.
Ah, yeah, thanks for that. Okay, Lülüfer, from your perspective, how does this agreement, because you said, Konstantinos, that the Geneva 51, Turkey hasn't accepted to be bound by it, but how does it fits legally in Turkey, this agreement? Parenthesis, there is many laws of emergencies being enacted, but what is your take on that? Unmute, please. Unmute your Zoom. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
I should say that I'm not an expert in law, and but as far as my experience and reading all the reports and evaluations done by the experts, it's a big question that if Turkey is a safe third country. And also Turkey has been reported that violated the non-refoulement principle various times. For example, this is one of the reasons why Turkey shouldn't be shouldn't be counted as a safe third country. And also that it was another problem that what is the treatment that readmitted refugees, faced in Turkey after they readmitted to Turkey, and these were all, discussed in Turkey. And as Tsitselikis said, it is totally political, this agreement, and that which has started in 1990s in order to fortify the borders of the European Union, the externalization of the borders. And this is another mechanism to do that. And as Tsitselikis said again, that it doesn't fit into the Geneva Convention and other legal mechanisms in refugeehood and refugee law.
We have more questions, and we have more questions from the Murmur box from our website.
The question is, what measures should be taken against Turkey for weaponizing refugees? How can Europe give money to Turkey while it uses humans for pressing politics?
Come again? Sorry, I couldn't understand clearly.
Sorry. What measures should be taken against Turkey for weaponizing refugees? How can Europe give money to Turkey while it uses humans for pressing politics?
Konstantinos, do you want to take this question? Unmute.
And then Lülüfer wants to talk first.
Lülüfer, you take it then.
As far as I understand, that the question is asking the weaponizing of the refugees.
Yeah, it asks what measures could or should be taken against Turkey for weaponizing refugees? I suppose legal measures, political measures, I don't know.
Okay, to Turkey. I mean, I don't have have an answer for this really, because actually both Turkey, Greece, and the European Union is part of this crime, let's say, because in a way each party has its own interests, and one is movement and giving opportunity or obstacles to the other. But as we've seen in the what happened in between March and April in the Turkish and Greek border, that the states are in partners in that crime. But what we can do both to press the Turkish, Greek, or the European Union's politics, that I think the solidarity and the politics that comes from the bottom, and we should, the ordinary people, should forge a politics to confront this corporate crime. Let's say we haven't found a solution yet. Okay, we are trying. I mean, both NGOs, activists, etc., and people really acting acting in solidarity are trying, partially, sometimes in collaboration, but we have to really forge new ways. And as far as I'm, aware, we couldn't find a good one yet. But I'm hopeful.
All right. We have a few more questions. Now it's 6:45. Yeah. How are you both with time? So for some practicalities. Okay. Lülüfer, you're okay with time. How much time do you have, Konstantine?
I have 5 or 10 minutes.
Okay. Let's take 5 or 10 minutes more, and then we can conclude. All right? Is that okay?
Yeah. Perfect.
Okay. So the last one of the let's choose this one. This the whole route that let's talk about Syrian refugees. There is one person, refugee, starts his or her journey from Syria. Obviously, there is preparation. They cannot just leave. They need a facilitation, in quotes, assistance. So they need other people to help them through move what is illegal, move through borders illegally, within quotes, because they are under prosecution, and they have to have, there must be this network of collaborators that they move the refugees from land to land, from coast to coast, from ship to ship, from containers to containers, from truck to truck, from borders to borders in the Balkans, until they reach maybe a European country where someone will take them. And so there's a whole economy, because there's a whole economy, I would like to say, and there are many different anecdotes that we're hearing, that I talked with refugees, says, I paid someone, and he brought me up to there, and then they locked me because the next guy wouldn't take me. He pulled back. So I was in 2 weeks in a house with no light, and because I couldn't be transferred back, and so we have many anecdotes of maybe basically cheap labor or illegal labor in Europe, or forced marriages sometimes, or so what anecdotes do you have? Because we have seen in Libya, for example, that the contractors that they're being paid to have boats, for example, in the Libyan Sea, that they're paid by the Libyan authorities or by EU, eventually they are part of this corrupted system. So what kind of anecdotes, how does a typical scenario work, is my question, from their starting point until their end point of one refugee or one family? What is a typical scenario?
If I may say something, there are no typical scenarios. You have, let's say, a series of typical scenarios. Some of them are quite neutral, and some of them are very bad and sad. That people, let's say, they put the whole village or the wife or the daughters under, let's say, uh, not they don't sell them, but if the guy cannot pay back the traffickers, then they will do something bad to their family, or they will take the girls or the wife.
Back home, you mean? So they live back home,
I
some
mean
family.
The traffickers.
I see.
So if they don't pay back, if they don't go, there are so many different ways to do it. Or they are waiting, so the guy goes to Germany, and then it sends 50% of the salary or the money he gets to the traffickers for 10 years. I don't know. So there are so many things like that they are trapped. People are trapped because they lack money. But there are, of course, so many cases that, okay, if you consider that a percentage of people lose their life, is also another group of stories like that. Or you have underage boys that they go with some uncle or other friend and they try to do the whole trajectory by themselves. And so who pays whom? Of course, you need money. Without money, you cannot do anything. But sometimes the whole village pays the money to send someone to Germany or Sweden. So this guy will send back some money to the village. This sounds a bit neutral or normal because this was the Greek and Turkish migration in the beginning of the 20th century was like that also. So that someone who was in the US sending the money to the village or the family. Okay, we don't have to forget. The problem, as you said it also, is that these people who are facilitators, in fact, let's take the good example, that really they take some money and they provide services, because we have other bad examples also, that they keep the money, they don't provide any service, are product of these hard borders between Greece and Turkey, between Libya and Italy, between Morocco and Spain. So because of this theory and motto that Europe has a very, very strong borderline and secure, you raise the tariff, and then what it should be according to refugee law, a safe passage, and this is very important to understand, a safe passage is owed to the refugee. So we create special hurdles. So in view to secure our side, we create insecurity for those who are trying to enter, and they have full right to enter, to trespassing borders. This is another thing we have to remind people, that the refugee has the right to trespass borders. So why to make it so insecure and to create our political issues now we're discussing in a kind of absolutely different approach would be, as we could reply to your previous question, that Greece and Turkey should cooperate in order to provide a safe passage. This would be an answer to that. So immediately you would eliminate all this crisis between Greece and Turkey, and you would have saved thousands of people. So what would be the final answer to this? That you have to eliminate the causes of the problems in Syria, in Afghanistan, and so the wars. So we have to go straight to the causes, in fact. So I don't want to talk more about this.
Yeah, you are lacking of time, and indeed, it's the root of the problem that it has to be tackled. But we know if we talk about the Syria conflict, it's far more complicated because there's a Russian influence, there are the coalition influences, you have tribal influences. Let's not go there. It's another show for that. So because I'm respecting your time, Konstantin, especially, the last question could be to Lülüfer, that actually a friend of mine told me. You touched a bit, Lülüfer, the issue of other minorities like Alevis or Alawis, well, they're in Syria. But you also mentioned the K word, Kurds, because there are refugees of Kurdish ethnicity origin that they are crossing into Turkey. So that's another issue. So the question is, how is different for first the Kurdish origin refugees that come to Turkey, and also for the LGBT minorities. Shout out to the film Mr. Gay Syria, by the way, because it was a very inspiring film that was shot in Turkey with LGBT people from Syria. That's a close of parenthesis. So how are their peculiar situation, the Kurdish origin refugees, ethnicity, and the LGBT minorities, if you know to tell us?
Yeah, actually, the general situation for the Syrians are very suppressing, are very, in a bad condition, that the differences related to ethnicity become invisible. Really, that you can't really observe what makes the difference, if any ethnicity makes it causes any difference, because that being a Syrian is already creates a really tough situation for the people. We've been discussed that really, and because during the field works and talking to people and the reports that printed etc. But really, we couldn't see very visible, very important difference among the different ethnicities yet. But maybe we will in the future, because being a Syrian is already Syrians are already having major issues. But when it comes to the LGBT people, individuals, it is much more different. They are having different kind of problems, both because of being the LGBTE, the discrimination you've been faced, and also if you are in a process of transition, changing gender, also you need to reach the treatment and healthcare services, etc. And in most cases, this does not provide by the Turkish state, but NGOs tries to support in this process, and they usually, like many of them, aims to go to Europe to have a better, peaceful social environment for themselves. And also Turkey, dominantly as being the masculine and anti-welcoming gender politics, that's why they are having harsher problems. And usually they are having more problem to find a house or reaching the services as well.
Okay, let's go to our concluding remarks, because we're respecting time. I'm going to start with you, George. Do you have any closing remarks from your behalf?
Actually, I have some. Can you hear me?
Go on.
Yeah.
So, as I understand, the main issue of both EU and Turkey is money.
Yeah.
Sorry. They don't have the money to sustain so many refugees for some reason. And for refugees, should be able to go to Europe or Turkey or wherever they want to be free of their
I think is that there are the ongoing problems that we'll be having in our country as well, that if you don't have the rule of law where everyone is equal to some basic freedoms and some basic health, access to health and access to respect to their own human rights, when you have such a big crisis, it's also broken, but it gets to a much bigger magnitude, I would say, isn't it, George?
Yes, maybe it's another issue we have to see in the system, generally in our system, political system.
Our police, political, also the police, the coast guards, because in our country there are many, for example, policemen who may mean well, but they don't know how to respect or treat some people of different background. And we have heard stories sometimes where they say, okay, if I take these 10 refugees, that's 10 days of work for me. I'm a policeman. I'm already overloaded with the job. So if I can push back the boat, then that, from my perspective, is problem solved. I'm sorry to speak like that, but it's a pattern that we see many times. That, okay, you say you're underage. No. You are 18 years old as a refugee. You're not 16. Please confess and sign this paper that you are 18 years old, because if you're a minor, it's very expensive and very hard for me. But if you are 18 years old, I can just pack you and send you back. This is something that we see on the ground. This many anecdotes, isn't it?
Maybe sometimes the one who signs doesn't even know what they are saying.
Yeah, if they don't have access to translator, many things to talk about. Your concluding remarks, Lülüfer, and then we go to Konstantinos before we conclude this interview. We didn't put any songs. We had Baba Zula and Altın Gün, but next time I promise to you, especially Lülüfer. Go on, your closing remarks, please.
My closing remarks is, unfortunately, I'm not hopeful for a shift in neither in Turkish or the Greeks or the European Union policy, providing safe passage or abiding the international law, etc. And a few days back, actually, Turkish Foreign Minister stated again that people just step back because of the coronavirus, but he said that once the pandemic ends, I'm sure that people will want to go to the Europe. And I'm not saying this is a threaten, but it will happen. So that's at least that says that we will be witnesses of these crimes more and more in coming days and years. But what we can do actually, still protect that our position and to strike back and to organize solidarity as far as we can do, as possible as we can do. That's it.
I like very much, Lülüfer, that you brought in the COVID-19 in the mix. It seems that it was also you, Konstantinos, mentioned that COVID-19 played an interesting role to at least the two sides backing up because they have the COVID-19. As we say in Greek, they made the calculations without the hotelier, without first speaking to the boss. And the boss in this situation is COVID-19, as we see this way. So, sorry. Your closing remarks, Konstantinos, before we conclude this interview, please.
My closing remark was that it was very positive and interesting to have a Greek-Turkish dialogue based in Cyprus. I think it's one of the rare cases we have this kind of dialogues. And this is a paradigm for cooperation, because without cooperation between civil societies, governments, political parties, or any kind of other group of people, we cannot change the situation. And the situation by itself has a tendency to go to the worse. So we have to find the means to reverse the situation for our societies, for our democracies, and for those people who are in absolute need, and we have to help them.
Okay. My closing remarks will be first to thank you, Konstantinos and Lülüfer, for being with us and for tolerating our test mode and for seeing the nice background here in Nicosia, Cyprus. I would like to thank George for being hero and the George downstairs for being heroes and solving some issues with the technical issues. And also, we would like to thank our listeners for their patience. Usually, we put much more songs, but here, because of a special situation, we said, okay, let's take it all the way. Next time will be better, guys and friends listening to us. So,
we're improving each time.
We're improving by the second month. So, thank you very much. Now it's time for the blurb. You have been listening to Meeting Points with Orestes Tsitselikis and George Nicolaou. Together with us was Mr. Konstantinos, excuse me for that, Tsitselikis. I have made so much rehearsals. And Lülüfer Körükmez. Thank you so much for being with us. This interview is going to be online as well to the social media and the websites of the International UN Watch, the organization which these 6 pilots that we have been commissioned and agreed is being made possible. Yeah. So, thank you very much and stay safe, stay hygiene, stay clean, stay sane, and we will talk again. And I promise you next time we're going to put more songs. Thank you very much, Konstantinos and Lülüfer.
Thank you to all of you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Bye.